What's going on, y'all? This is another class of political education with community movement builders. And today we're going to go over a great book with Sekou. He's going to be, this is second time doing it, second time facilitating. Again, if you want to join the
Sure.
class, all you got to do is come through, holler at us on social media, WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, and we'll get you plugged in. But Sekou, why don't you go ahead and start it off?
I just want to have a public correction. This is my third class facilitating.
Oh, third class.
In
Go
spite of
ahead.
hate,
Right, get all your credit, all the credit.
man, what's wrong with these Negroes, man? In spite of hate, negativity, or adverse circumstances, we stand tall despite it all. We claim the victory and we declare the defeat of our enemies. For we are freedom fighters sent by time immemorial to bring death and destruction to the capitalist world order and to help usher in a society, a civilization of justice, honor, dignity, and peace. All right, welcome everybody to this edition of CMB Community Movement Builders Political Education class. This is one of my favorite individuals, historical figures and ancestors to study and to look into because I believe of his kind of like his political historical foresight and analyzing, almost similar to Marx, anticipating a transition in the system, and that transition in which dear ancestor and brother James Boggs anticipating and seeing in his early infancy was what we call today globalization, or at least a portion, partial of it in relation to his understanding of like automation in relationship to the nature of work and what would that do to the workforce. So my question for everyone would be, any initial thoughts off the text?
Yeah, man, I like the reading. It was interesting. He talked about the working or the labor movement of the time. He had critiques about things were going on at the time as far as what people were currently speaking about and what they should be speaking about. So I thought it was an interesting read.
Yeah, and I'm definitely always a big fan of anything dealing with like automation because it's for some reason I think it doesn't get talked about except only in these type of circles, like when you're intentionally talking about it, but it's so intertwined with class struggle. It's the heart of it. So, I think it needs to be brought up more and more.
Yeah, I really like this text too. Even though I'm always concerned when I see reading, like I read stuff and I find the analysis to be still apt today, and it's like several decades old. But only because I just feel like it maybe represents the stagnancy of our movements in a way. But I really like this piece. I really like the automation, like the chapter 2 on automation, and I think a lot of it still applies and can be even applied to like all this discussion we're having about like artificial intelligence and stuff like that. So I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, those are all salient points. And turning a lot of points about like the slogans of the movement to pick it up. I believe like Brother Zay was saying, certain sectors of movement, I guess those who are more like critically engaged and like intentionally reading and like like probing these type of questions. This is like more of a phenomenon, but maybe not like on a everyday basis, if you will. And then two, this should be pointed out. James Boggs never went to academia. So
Mhm.
maybe that's why he's not discussed much. He doesn't have any degrees. He was a worker who wrote. He was like a genuine working class intelligentsia. So I don't know. Maybe that's like a reason too why he's not talked about very much. But going,
I think that could have a big problem because I I don't want to say it, but when you said that, the first person that came to my mind was like Angela Davis. But I don't want to diss her or anything. But I'm just thinking like, do we know people because they have like academic positions? You know, is that it's sort of like we make these claims about proletariat and what we believe in, but yet even the people that we look up to are there only because of the positions that they're in. You know what I'm saying?
Mm. I don't, you asking a serious question there. But that's probably something to do with it. But going to the heart of this here text, um, I would like to get down to the section where it says, this is the latter part of it when it says they were not ready to make any serious sacrifices of these bases. So this is it's probably like a couple, like 2 or 3 strolls down when it says over and over again, workers in various shops and industries faced with a critical issue only divide and become disunited, even though they are well aware that they're being unprincipled and weakening their own cause as workers. Since the advent of automation, there has not been any serious sentiment for striking, particularly if the strike was going to come at the expense of material things that the workers already had in their possession, like cars, refrigerators, TV sets, etc. They are not ready to make any serious sacrifices of these. They would rather sacrifice the issue. Between the personal things and the issue, they have chosen the personal. Most American workers have geared themselves to a standard of living that is based on a 5-day week plus, either in a form of overtime or another job, part or full time. And anytime this standard of living is threatened, it is a personal crisis, which means that more and more decisions are being personalized and individualized rather than collectivized and socialized. What then happens to the class struggle? At this point, the class consciousness of the workers tends to shift from what is traditionally beyond what has traditionally been considered its main quality, hostility to the class enemy outside, and to focus on antagonisms, struggles, conflicts among the workers themselves. Now, I'm curious what you guys thoughts about this particular section I read about, kind of like the nature of conflict internal to what we would consider to be the working class element, or what he's theorizing as a worker himself on like who worked in the factory by what he sees as like the certain the dynamics within workers themselves in relationship to like the comment of automation and what it how it drives their individual interests.
I think
I
it
would say,
represents a huge struggle for us because it's I'm just thinking when we try to unionize or whatever, you try to get the people to come together and do these things. It's like they done got so used to the way of life, it's hard to get them to think past what's today. Even though that even that 5-day work week, I believe, is came at the as a result of a socialist struggle. But it's just like when people are just comfortable, it's hard to push them past certain areas, and I think that does hurt our struggles.
I heard someone else wanted to speak as well. Yeah.
I'll just say real quick that it's so stratified today that it's sort of hard to think about how to get the workers involved in a way that doesn't interfere with what they're primarily most concerned about and which they have to be concerned about, which is having a roof over their head, having food, being able to take care of people who they are responsible for. It's just hard to deal with that, especially just today. Um, but there has to be a way to, I guess, put it into make it a part of the organized effort. But I'm just not sure how to do that because just looking at our elections show that workers still vote against their own interests across the board. Right, you talk about the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, workers still vote against their own interests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think those are all great points to highlight. And then if you go a little further down the section when it says these struggles among the old workers, now he's speaking about the difference in like the older generation of workers who fought for like the 5 day work week, the work, the nature of work that we are accustomed to today. This is that generation of people of the 1930s who struggled and fought for that. That was all right. So he kind of gets into some of the points that have been raised as it relates to you know workers' interests and like the nature of work itself and how it's understood in the United States context and how automation, and like increasing the increasing technology in terms of work also has changed in terms of the new workers. And it says these struggles among the old workers, which are creating such antagonisms among them, are really on a delaying tactics on the part of the old herd. They do not touch the real question. It is automation, which is the reality facing them and everybody in American society today. American, to, American, America today is headed towards an automated society. It cannot be stopped by feather bedding, by refusal to work overtime, by sabotage, or by shortening the work week by a few hours. America today is rapidly reaching a point where, in order to defend the welfare state and the capitalist system, there will be automation on top of automation. The dilemma, and this goes into my next question, the dilemma before the workers and the American people is how can we have automation and still earn our livings? And anyone is free to jump on that question. Go ahead,
Yeah, we probably don't. I mean, we probably just get displaced. Like this happens like every evolution in technology. Jobs get taken out, And so I think that's what he goes on to talk about is what happens when, none of those jobs are like jobs essentially are not needed because you have enough automation to take over.
Yeah, it's a theoretical or kind of philosophical question, but it's real because we're dealing with it materially. He talks about later in the text about work, and that's really what that question is about. How how do we understand work, or is work even needed? Um, with the continuous specialization or automation of um, of of the workforce, and Um, I'm sure there's people who've dealt with the question of work, or rather, work is still needed, or what will work look like. But I don't know if that's a question that we're ready to tackle in a mass sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think y'all are both right, and I think y'all bring up some good points. And I think that Boggs like mentioning that like automation, eliminates the need for even skilled workers. So, sometimes we have these conversations and people talk about it in the scope of, oh, unskilled workers are the only ones that are going to lose their job to automation. But like all of us are affected by it. And so, making sure that we can have that mass conversation about how our lives look like in a world beyond work is important.
You hit it right on the head. That really, I feel like that's the heart, really the heart of the question of automated as a political problem, a political question. I guess since we're going to have a little short on time, we can also get to my other question as it relates to this the very thing you just hit on. Why do we have jobs if our labor is redundant or doesn't even meet our basic material needs to make a life, right? And I give my understanding of like how I'll answer this question. I I believe what we understand to be that's why I said labor in relation to work. I feel like labor is like energy and output. That's what you put out to get something, right? Between like trying to make something. What I understand to be work is a wage labor. That's something you do in exchange for goods. That's a relationship, what refer to as extortion. Because if you don't work, what they say, you don't work, you don't eat, right? So I feel like the relationship we have to work in terms of ability to get goods is already at a point of extortion, or like it's like access is uh is uh is limited to those who kind of like follow the system, right? And like automation, I heard like different criticisms of like this type of theory of automation being like is very like utopian in nature, but that's also like one of the strong suits of like James Bars is kind of like very utopian, but also very material in its analysis of like like what these questions were posed. So if like I have another question. Let's put it out there as well, so you can either one of these questions you can answer. I says, what does it mean to struggle against capitalism absent the centrality of work as the focus of organizing? Like, do we want to be liberated so we can just? I think it's a section in the text too, if I can find it, where I speak. Is like something to the effect is like it's the goal of liberation in order to take over a factory, to do it ourselves. But in the text somewhere in here, it says that, well, if what if it's unnecessary, like socially unnecessary, even to have that, and like automation. And I feel like that's like one of the goals of like all like anti-capitalist, like communistic thinking is like a post-capitalist society, which is like to say a world in which we're no longer bound by like either like wages or a place that we can like be fully human and like in my ideal situation, I can spend my times, like many different places, like have a base, and like say in like in the North Bay area, where I have like a nice cabin home, and I can sip some Chardonnay and like read my books, and if I get tired of that, I want to come back home to the South for a time. I can do that. But what do you guys think about those two questions about the absence of work as being central to organizing, and like why do we have jobs if like our jobs in and of itself are like bullshit, excuse my language, or socially redundant? It's like it's not really a thing, right? Because like if you look in Atlanta, if those of you here in Atlanta, or like wherever city you're in, you'll notice if wherever city you're in, the economy is dominated by a service industry. Nothing is being made. So like the pandemic hit, and we're seeing, this kind of like the James Bars in real life, and like these type of questions we put to the test, but not by automation, but by exterior force itself. But still, the nature of work was put into question. You know.
Right.
Well,
I say
first,
real quick that I like the way that you described it as extortion, because that's exactly the nature of work under the context of white domination. It's a extortive practice. The reason that's work is because that's how they capture surplus. We're capital, so that's why we work. It's definitely not for our own benefit because most of us are check by check. We're what they call as poor or near poor or working poor. So it's definitely not in our benefit. And in an innate sense, it is because we have no choice. We have to do it. Um, but really, it doesn't benefit us in any real sense. And also, like that, you brought up, you stated something about mass because he speaks about in the text, or he critiques the idea of organizing on this idea of the mass work base if workers are no longer becoming needed or work is becoming so specialized that the quote unquote work base is shrinking. So how can you have a movement based on a mass work base if workers are becoming displaced and are becoming smaller and smaller? So I like that you brought that up as well. Um, yeah, I'll keep it there.
yeah, I think you guys hit on the nail, right? It's like we got to go into work because one of the features of capitalism is the wage system. So they need it, but um, so that's why they do it. And then I forget the other question you said. I think it's something to the T of like post capitalist economies and why should we work with the like in a working class fashion. Well, that was the question, right?
Yeah, the question was, why do we have jobs if our labor is redundant or doesn't even meet our basic material needs to make a life? Like if we didn't work, it didn't work. or we do work or not work, it really doesn't, as Dorian said, it doesn't really like either like spiritually or philosophically benefits us, but it only benefits our ability to like go day by day. So like, do we really need to work if like, if society can function without it?
No, we don't. I don't think we do. But I think it's so deeply ingrained in us to think that way though. But I think it's up to us to make a different world. Like what would we do without it? But there's plenty of things that we could do. Like we can express ourselves in any way we can possible. I mean, but I think that work is so deeply ingrained, like from a religious perspective to a cultural perspective, like because I know everybody when I usually talk about this, they usually just go, "Well, you all you socialists, y'all just lazy and don't want to go to work, and that's y'all problem." But I think they misunderstand these arguments. Big shout out to Yafei, our Dallas chapter leader, joining us.
Peace, peace, peace.
All right.
Yeah, I think these are all great points, but also it's a text. I forget the name of the author. I think it's some like French guy, French writer. It says it's you can guys look it up. It's called "The Right to Be Lazy." So there are arguments to defend such a position of being, anti-work in terms like a wage labor system. I know plenty of things I'll do. I feel like the pandemic, we kind of got a taste of uh, not necessarily a post-capitalist situation, but like a situation in which work was no longer necessary in order to live. Like, I don't know, this from my own personal experience, 2020, outside the catastrophe of it all and like the many deaths that happened, it's probably the kind of the most money I ever had in my life. And I didn't work. I don't remember working very much. I was able to like, me and my partner at the time, we was able to like take road trips and like, it was like, I know we didn't necessarily, we supposed to be like socially distanced, but it was like parties and like, it was like uprising. It was a beautiful time after work and we still had money and like we did what we want to do. So that kind of gave me an idea and like in real time, how would what would we do if we didn't have to work? And like
You
that was
know,
like a big question like the government had to deal with.
you know what else is people were like, man, I'm spending more time with my family.
Come on, now.
Which I
So,
think was like huge, right? Because it was just like everybody's like, well, I have to go to work so I can feed their family. But then when they were forced together, it's like they had to like get to know each other in a real human way.
yeah, and I'll leave right here and we can continue on with the text. I got it from my auntie. My mama hate that I even talk this way, but you probably you hear me say it all the time, right? When people ask me like, do you got to go to work? I say, yeah, I got to go to the plantation. Like I'm clear about my position at the place. So I use the language of like this is like a form of like curtailment and a couple degrees away from enslavement. You know, in terms of our time, right? Because like that's at the end of the day, that's what we're giving up is our precious time. And that's the only valuable resource a human being truly has, you know? So that's something I just wanted to raise. Like,
Got 10
but
minutes left.
if we can go down further to it says automation replaces men, or put it in our, in our social language of the day, automation replaces human beings. This, of course, is nothing new. What is new is that now, unlike most earlier periods, the displaced human beings have nowhere to go. The farmers displaced by mechanization of the farms and the 20s could go to the cities, and human beings, man the assembly lines. As for the work animals, like the mule, they could just stop growing them. But automation displaces people. You don't just stop growing people, even when they have been made expendable by the system. Under Stalin, the kulaks and all those who didn't go along with the collectivization of agriculture were just killed off. Even then, if they had been ready to go along, Stalin could have used them. But in the United States, with automation coming in when the industry has been already reached the point that it can supply consumer demand. The question of what to do with the surplus people who are the expendables of automation becomes more and more critical every day. What are you guys' thoughts on that? What do we do? What do we do? if like if like it's a surplus or like what we unfortunately ain't gonna be able to get to the section called the American Revolution, but he poses a question and refer to these people as being like the outsiders, right? Of like the traditional working class, right? So I'm curious, what do you guys thought? What do we do with a surplus of people who are expendables of automation because becomes more and more critical every day?
I think if we can create like a utopian socialist situation where we had like some alternative economies, they could go there and live outside the capitalist system.
Anyone else have any remarks or critical reflection, comments? Feel free.
No, I'll just say I agree with Zaire. We can't just let them starve and die out, and you know, you can't just kill them off. You know, which is pretty much the same thing as just letting them starve and die out. So there has to be some way to allow them to live full, meaningful lives, even outside the specialized workforce.
I would love to hear from some for anyone else. I'm really curious about your reflections about what do we do with people who are no longer necessary for the functioning of a capitalist system like in here in the United States, in particular as it relates to Black people, because that's something I've heard for the last couple of years now that the Black labor workforce has become redundant. It's like unnecessary labor pool for like the functioning of American society. So that's why mass incarceration is such a phenomenon, which you can
Mm.
bring in conversation with automation. Someone wanted to speak? Brother Yusuf, yeah, Brother Balagoon. All right, I'll just continue on.
It happens, but it happens with every transition from a different economic system, man. And I think that's the real question that this brings up is just, with each transition, you're dealing with this displacement and what's gonna be the new thing, because I think it might be under those contradictions of capital, right? Like that would lead to its own destruction. I think Marx talks about this, the industrial reserve army or something like that. And I would think they have some kind of potential for revolution, but I'm not going to put that on anybody. But I think it definitely what to do with them. I would say the best cause if you can give them some kind of alternative, so that way they don't have to keep coming back to this and making capitalism work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it'd be nice to think that you can turn that workforce into some autonomous um, zones or autonomous areas that have their own
And not go
economic.
back to work. Yeah, and like
Right,
because I mean it would collapse.
right. Yeah, it'd be interesting. I mean, there's a lot of homeless people in the United States. It'd be something to think about to try to do is organize them into like autonomous um, zones and then see what happens.
Mm-hmm. All right, this is probably the last thing I read from here. Can you scroll a little bit down? It says, thus, automation not only poses the question of poverty and employment. Um, it says here that thus, automation not only poses the questions of poverty and employment and related economic questions, it brings us to sharp focus that element which the Negroes, Black, New Africans always bring with them when they struggle for their rights. It makes the question social because it poses the relations of man to man. That kind of spoke to me. He kind of he's put like the black dynamic, right? That the black question is like a social question in a relationship. Like how do we relate to each other? Because like we live in anti-black world, and that's like a question about power and how we relate to each other, and like automation and like the outside workforce, which it creates, also you know puts that into focus. And like socially, what will we do? And then it says, as automation spreads, it will intensify the crisis of capitalism and sharpen the conflicts among the various sections of the population, particularly between those working and those not working, those paying taxes and those not paying taxes. Out of this conflict will grow a counter-revolutionary movement made up of those from all social layers who resent the continued cost of them on maintaining these expendables, but who are determined to maintain a system that creates the multiples the number of expendables. This is, in turn will mobilize those who begin by recognizing the right of those displaced persons to live, the right to life, and from there, will force a struggle for a society in which there are no displaced persons. So
I hope that's true. I hope that happens. But I think there's also that turn for fascism, I think, in America. Well, people will depend too much on the state, and the state will take over and be daddy for society. But I definitely hope that happens there.
Yeah, fascism is always right there. But I do find it interesting that he tried to point out, because he spoke about throughout the text about the antagonisms of the workforce. And at that particular part, he talked about those who are paying taxes and those who are not paying taxes. I would think that the way you would need to do that is to have some type of ideological focus. Of course, the material is always important, and people require material analysis. But how do you cut across different material oriented interests, such as, well, we pay taxes, you don't pay taxes, we work, you don't work? How do you get across that without some type of ideological and maybe cultural focus that could cut across all of that? There would have to be some type of ideological way to cut across that in order to make anything work. Because if it's just the material interest, then there's no way to harmonize those of us who work and those of us who don't work, those of us who pay taxes, those of us who don't, those of us who are considered part of the capitalist um, um, a
It's
political
probably
economy,
gonna
and
cut
those of
off
us who are
soon.
considered outside of it. Like we have to have a way to cut across that. So I think that we need to be some type of ideological focus.
right on, brother
It's probably
Balagoon.
this probably gonna cut off. So whoever's talking next is probably gonna cut off. So